Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar hosted by CBX Software and Weave Consulting Services. My name is Manda Huang, and I'm the Marketing Director for CBX Software and also the moderator for today's session. We're very excited to have a range of different retailers, brands, consultants, and service providers in today's session. Now, this webinar is a part of our ongoing global sourcing thought leadership effort, which is focused on providing actionable insights in terms of improving your sourcing, quality, and supply management programs. Now, we'll start with some household rules. The webinar will run for approximately 40 minutes. We will record it and make it available for download after the event. All attendees will be muted during the webcast. And if you have any questions, please contact myself at the email address on the screen. Now, I just want to quickly introduce the speakers. First of all, we're lucky to have Fred Lemoyne. Fred is a leader and authority on supply chain and retail management. He is the Vice President at Weave, a global supply and demand planning consulting firm that specializes in improving supply chain efficiency for retailers and brands. Our second speaker is Eric Linkswater. Eric has over 20 years experience working with lead cloud and SaaS providers, supporting retailers with workflow process management towards increased profitability. Now, on that note, I'm just going to pass it to Fred and let him take it from here.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Manda. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me maybe just start by giving a very short introduction of Weave Services Limited. So Weave, in simple terms, is a supply chain specialist consulting firm. We specialize in production planning, demand forecasting, and inventory optimization. So the typical issues that we typically come to solve for our clients would be anything along having long lead times of replenishment, having unbalanced inventory levels, or simply having a high production cost, impacting their profitability. So in simple terms, what Weave aims to do is really demystify these topics and provide practical solutions to our clients. For myself, I've been pretty much working my entire life in retail and supply chain management, working for Marks & Spencer in the UK, A.S. Watson in Europe and Asia, and also McKinsey in the same functions of supply chain and retail expert. So if you need more information on our company, I believe Eric at the end will also give you our contact details, and you'll be able to reach out to us. So the part that we wanted to discuss today was speed to market. So first of all, why speed to market? In a very recent survey done by Deloitte Consulting just this year, when we were asking some of the key executives in the industry as to what are the three major market pressures that they are facing today, as you can see here from this slide, number two in their mind was demand for increased speed to market. I think these days, with the increased pressure on inventory and sort of reaction to changes in the market, this is becoming a critical success factor for many retailers and brands. So the objective of today will be threefold. One, I'm going to take you through some of the major root causes that prevent retailers to react speedily to market changes. I'd like to also put some numbers around it because very often, we don't really have a sense as to how much money we're leaving on the table. So that will be part of what we're going to talk about today. But more importantly, the objective is really to provide very simple, practical toolkit for you guys to then take away and implement in your jobs or to your teams at the end of this presentation. So that would be the three major topics we're going to cover right now. Without further ado, let's look at a big picture. So, the starting point really is to realize that on average, in the sort of major developed economies, the United States and Europe, shoppers experience about 80% out of stock on a pretty reoccurring basis. And when we look at that for certain markets like the UK or the United States, this particular figure, is actually well below sort of 70% for online shopping. So the implications really are pretty severe because running out of stock will drive, as most of you will probably know, will drive shoppers to, well, postpone their buy. As you can see here, 9% will say, "I do not purchase the item," or 15% will say, "I'll purchase the item later." But more importantly, around about 60% of them will actually abandon your stores or abandon your brand. So that's a pretty significant number when you think that, every 2 occasions out of 10, a shopper will actually, 60% of that time, then the shopper will be potentially leaving your store. So pretty significant impact on any retailers and brands. So what we're going to try and do here is present you two scenarios. So the first scenario I'm going to talk about is a client example, and they faced out of stock at the start of the season, right? So we will have an example on the start of the season, and the other one will be later on towards the middle or end part of the season. So on the first client, the client had some projections of potential sales, as you can see here, with a peak towards the end of the replenishment cycle period in the middle. Then we mapped out in a blue color their actual sales. So you can see now a bit more clearly that we have a bit of a gap at the beginning of the replenishment period. And that gap pretty much equates to about 25% of lost sales. Now, the reason why this client had such a gap at the beginning is that their purchase orders and the goods were not scheduled to be arriving before kind of 2/3 of the way of that replenishment phase. So in a sense, high potential, the product was a success, but not enough products to fill the shelves. Then the products came on, and then the sales went back pretty much towards a more sort of predicted sales forecast. So in a sense, in that particular case, if you break that down, you can see that the bulk of the lost sales really were generated by insufficient level of stock pretty much at the start of the season. Another client had a different issue. In this case, this client had a lot more predictable item, and they also created a sales projected forecast. We also mapped out the actual sales, so it was pretty good in terms of the actuals. But the biggest gap for that particular retailer was towards the end. There was still a huge amount of discrepancy between the projected sales and the actual sales at the end of the season, as you can see here in the purple area. And for this client, this resulted in 30% of lost sales. Now, here we're talking about full price margins, and that in this case could be a significant impact on your P&L. So this example really illustrates that the out of stocks for the retailer could have sort of two major occurrences, either at the beginning and then or at the end. So we're going to further down the road explore some of those root causes and reasons behind that. So looking at another bit of analytics here, we can see that if you break down the root causes of the out of stock, about 70% of that occurs as a result of the way we are forecasting and the way we are planning the ordering and management and inventory management of those products. So going a little bit deeper into those initial root causes, out of stocks could occur across, sort of five fundamental issues. One, we would have under forecast, so our forecast accuracy will be low. The other one is we may have actually long replenishment lead time that prevents us to actually reach the market in a timely manner when the demand is still there. The other part is we may have disturbance in the replenishments, maybe infrequent replenishments. And the other part, the supplier or your vendor may be just simply out of raw material or components. And the last one, it could be some production issues. But in this case, we will want to focus our attention particularly on the first two, which are more within the realm of the ordering part. So what can I do from the perspective of forecasting and lead time management? So in this case, what we're going to talk about today is a program called Read and React. Read and React really is an end-to-end management framework or supply chain sort of tool, really, that enable retailers and brands to capitalize on those forecast and replenishment opportunities. So three major principles: buy smart, engage your suppliers, and always start planning from the material, right? So we're going to deep dive a little bit more into that in this presentation. So for this, we've created a more detailed framework that you guys could then take away. So starting from a selection of products, then of course, then you go into the buy smart section, which is then broken down into three subsections: the forecast, the confidence level, and the risk factor. So we're going to touch on that. Then you move on to the engagement with your suppliers. Then you start, of course, with the planning aspect of your material, and the most important part is then when you move into the read and react part, which we're going to talk about as well in this presentation. So without further ado, let's jump into the buy smart section. So the idea here is that there are three major steps. What we see is, we have to bring very often a bit more science to the art of retail management. So one of the common pitfalls that we see some of our clients fall into is they forecast using historical data, but in this case, the historical data has not been cleaned. So what does that mean is that it contains potential out of stocks, potentially creating trends that are abnormal, not capturing the lost sales, or we could actually create peaks that will be artificially created through promotions or other activities. Now, using this information can distort significantly your ability to forecast. Then, assuming that you've cleaned your data, you then apply some advanced forecasting methodologies to sort of define your season trend. Then after that, of course, you introduce products, so there will be variation on your products, whether it's a different color, slightly different shape, or you're changing the packaging. There will always be some different variations, different degrees of innovation launched to the market. So the important part here is because at that point in time in your process, you're dealing with probability, right? It's a forecast, it's an anticipation of a trend. So what is very important is to that forecast is that we understand the level of statistical risk or the statistical success factor of that product being launched. And once we understand that, then of course we have to evaluate the risk. So how do we evaluate the risk in this case? It's a very simple methodology that I'm sure most of you guys will be using out there, is calculating at a threshold point what will be the quantity of products that I will sell on full price on full margin versus the lost sales that I will have through heavy markdowns at the end of the season. So to put this in perspective, I just would like to highlight a little bit what it looks like from a statistical perspective, but without going too crazy on the math. So let's have a look at this. So this curve here represents effectively, let me focus on the first one, the blue one. So this is effectively the shape of your buy for the season. The base actually represents the quantity that you would purchase, and the y-axis is probability. So in other words, what is the probability of selling 100 units? What is the probability of selling 200 units? What is the probability of selling 1,000 units? Right? So you would eventually reach a point where you would have very high probability of hitting a particular number. So that's basically what that normal distribution shape highlights. But that's for your total buy of the season. Of course, then you have to figure out what am I going to buy on my initial buy. So very similar logic, is applied, and another normal distribution bell-shaped curve is then applied. Now, here is the trick, is that you can see that those two curves will intersect at a particular point. And that intersection actually defines whether you're going to be, in this case, out of stock. So you will have forecasting a quantity that will not be sufficient to catch the rest of the demand, or you would have been too ambitious, and then in this case you would overflow over what your natural quantities or your natural demand would have asked of you. So understanding those fundamental sort of statistics are quite important, because the majority of products could actually simply fall into this model. And for buyers or merchandisers to understand the mechanics is extremely important, as this will be driving their behavior towards their commitment, their open to buy, and their ability to replenish on time. So that takes us already big tick in the box. Now I can buy smart, all right? I've defined the quantity that I want to buy. Now let's go and talk to my supplier. So here is an example of a client that didn't talk to his supplier. So what happened here is that this particular client has two types of products that go into a factory. They have products that are seasonal and products that are rolling. Now, the buyer in this case doesn't particularly consider any constraints in the factory. Only the way they work out their PO exit factory date are simply, when do I need the product in the store? What is the lead time that I was given? Let's place the order. Now, of course, if you do that, now all products are needed at the same time. So what you create is, very heavy peaks in production. Now, those peaks in production will result into a couple of things. Either the factory will ask to postpone the date, or they won't ask and then it will simply ship it late. Or it could result in incremental cost or additional negative impact to you. But in this case, in the case of speed to market, if you are in this particular model, the supplier will most likely not be in a position to accept your orders. So if you think back about the two scenarios we discussed at the beginning, you're either going to be in a position where you see your sales really picking up, you place a purchase order, and then the supplier tells you, sorry, you have no capacity. Right? So that's the reality of what I believe a lot of our clients, retailers, brands, face on a day-to-day basis. So here the idea is really, going back to, so strong foundations and collaboration. So here we highlight the benefits of sales and operation planning, S&OP, but really there are different degrees to which you can communicate to your client, and that will depend on the degree of vendor management, capabilities or frameworks that you would have developed with your clients. But if we focus on the core principles here, more importantly, is we would have really, it's all about first of all, the decisions, right? So the decision is about the capacity constraints, understanding the sequencing of the purchase orders, and what are the costs and benefits associated with that. Because everything's possible if you increase, of course, your cost. But so who should attend, right? So this is not the position of one buyer, one merchandiser. It's actually a collective force, because as we all know, there's also the positions whereby, parties are aligned, but finance say, well, you're open to buy, the constraints we've added to the open to buy do not allow you to buy at that moment in time. There's no sufficient evidence of that product, moving forward. So having all parties aligned, whether they are in the same meeting or whether there's some pre-meetings alignment that happens, is essential to the success of these programs. And finally, it's really about developing those regular collaboration, whether you use dashboards for performance, clear visibility of where we are, engaging on future production needs, aligning on any disturbance to the plan, and taking corrective actions is extremely important. Now, to our experience, these practices are well understood, but very often not very well implemented. So it's very important to bring that back as a cornerstone of any speed to market programs. So now that we've spoken to our suppliers, it's time to also think about the material. So here is an example of the gains you could have in lead time simply by planning your material in advance, right? Pretty significant. If I didn't do anything on the material, it would take me 160 days to reach the market. If I had some sort of smart engagement on my material, I could actually shorten that down to 65. So how do we do that? There's a number of techniques that can be used, but basically, a big part of the material lead time could be saved through either grade booking or looking at even pre-dyeing the fabric if you have a strong sense of what color will come through. Most of the time, and again, if you have an understanding of the probability of your products selling, again, back to your confidence level, you would apply different techniques. So it's important to link the two together. But what we advise our clients to do is to go beyond the fabric, because this is the case of a particular pair of pants. And as you can see, we've grouped the different components by their lead time. Right, so we ignored in this case other factors. We just say, okay, let's group the things from the longest lead time to the lowest lead time. Therefore, what are the materials or trims or components that I should preposition or commit in advance in order to save a certain amount of time that will allow me to react faster to my changes in demand. So booking the fabric only may not always be a gain saver. This particular, so for instance, if you have lingerie or bras, if you book the fabric but then you don't look at the components, you may only save 2 days. So it's important to break it down at the component level and then really understand your strategy as to, okay, how much do I want to commit on that versus the time I want to be saving. So once you've done this work, the important part is that you then have those groupings, as you can see on this slide. You have A, B, C, D, E grouping, right? If you remember to the time that they each make up in the supply chain. And what you would then have is the ability to then figure out how much time you want to shave off, from that lead time, right? So again, it's the balance between the cost of pre-positioning, having some liability versus the speed to market. So, of course, everything has a financial aspect. So we present this framework for you guys and me to think about how to minimize the risk or calculate the risk. So first of all, as you can see here, we define different criteria that your team can use for calculating the risk. So for instance, if I commit this fabric, how many months will I get if I buy one MOQ? How many styles are sharing this fabric? So you can diversify your risk. What is the sequence of purchase that I would have, and so on and so forth. So then you assign a risk factor to those groups. And once you have that, then you're in a position to make a decision with your finance team in saying, okay, here are the gains that I foresee having by selling additional quantities on a full price, on a full margin basis versus the potential risk that we will have in liability. So it's a very simple conversation to have. It's very fact-based, and more importantly, very focused on your financial projections. So now we've also booked our fabric. So we're in a great position. I have a strong forecast. I've spoken to my supplier about my engagements. I've now pre-positioned the fabric that I need to have. So I'm in great shape. So the idea right here is to say, right, so let's start engaging on the read and react program. So what does it all mean? So simply speaking, at the start of the season, you will start reading the sales, right? As most of you would do. But the important part at this point in time is you read the sales for the perspective of adjusting the distribution that you had projected in terms of size, color, or other sort of components of sort of manufacturing conditions you would have engaged your supplier on. So what that means is that you define your probability of hitting a particular set of figures or a particular type within that set of figures, particular type of colors or sizes. And now is the time to, of course, use real data, replug the live data into your model, and then reproject the quantities that you should have. So a very important part, and we often see that happen with some of our clients, is that they commit far too much in advance. Now you can commit on the grade, or you can commit without necessarily booking the entire commitment, 3-4 months worth of inventory, because in this case, then you will be potentially left with quite a few sizes or colors that may not match the market. So the read and react really is about ensuring that yes, you have your commitment, but you can react. Otherwise, if you read but can't react, then it's sort of deflecting the object of this program. So some clients say, well, what should the read period be? That very much varies depending on the life cycle of the product. Anything below 2 to 3 weeks is dangerous, because your sample size of data point will not be sufficient to statistically, give you the right output. But again, you need to be mindful of the life cycle of the product and the reorder point. So there's a couple of calculations that need to go into that. Of course, then you enter your replenishment periods, right? So this is the period when you need to make a decision. So you read it, and then you need to react. So this is the time when you go to action. Of course, you've pre-agreed the open to buy conditions with your finance team, and you've calculated your projected risk and opportunities. So in this particular case, it should be a bit of a breeze, hopefully to get those early commitments placed. And your supplier is expecting those orders. So actually, the capacity should be well open, and the sewers, or the workers in the factory are already kind of eagerly awaiting those orders to come through. So what we see is there's still some tricks that some of our clients play. So we see that in certain retailers in the UK and also in some of the United States, but for different sort of reasons. But there's some tricks you can play in the production and transportation distribution area. One of them is what people call, as you can see, the second bullet point on that section, called direct to store shipment. So what does that mean? It means that the products are actually pre-picked, at store level. At the factory. Pros and cons. Some people prefer to get bulk quantities and then cross dock them directly on the latest sales into the distribution centers. That's also very valid. Also a very good way to accelerate the speed to market. Some people prefer to have it pre-picked for cost reasons in the factory, and so no right or wrong. I think different companies have different objectives to achieve, but the most important thing for you to think about is that, okay, how do I distribute as well, right? Do I want my product to go into your warehouse, stay there a few days, and have maybe a week to 2 weeks turnaround time, or do I want to really really hit the stores as soon as it comes to our shores? So those are the practical questions that you and your logistics team would have to think about. Now, this is it. The orders are being manufactured. They are loaded into the containers. The warehouse is ready to cross dock as soon as they come in. And this is when, of course, we distribute. So the distribution also has a very important role to play. We haven't really touched that point in this presentation, but it's important to understand that having a phased approach to your distribution from distribution center to stores is very important. If you push things down the line or down your stores too fast or too early, you may be trapping certain inventory simply in the wrong places. So we always advocate, even from the perspective of DC to store kind of distribution, to also do it in a phased way, to read and react also from that perspective. It saves you from redistributing stock from stores back to DCs or doing store-to-store transfers, which these days are extremely expensive operations to conduct. So that pretty much covers the majority of the points that we wanted to highlight. Hopefully this has given you a bit of a flavor for and some practical tips and examples on how to conduct that. But if we think about kind of the major principles of what we're trying to address here, is that a forecast is a forecast and it will never be 100% accurate. But not having a forecast is often a lot worse than having a slightly inaccurate forecast. The other idea is that, speed to market doesn't happen miraculously because your name is a famous fast fashion retail chain. But it happens because you have full integration of the parties, within your supply chain, as we described here. And what we see is these days, chief supply chain officers really focus on nimble and agile supply chains. And really, the Read and React program are the core backbone of nimble and agile supply chains. There's many variations on the theme that could be applied by industry and by segment within certain industries. But the backbones would always go back to what we just described here in this presentation. So, really think about speed by developing fact-based and data-driven analysis. Again, emphasize the point of developing interdepartmental decision-making, becoming harder and harder these days, particularly with the size of certain organizations, but also the move towards heavy bombardments of daily emails. I think we should, for certain key meetings, go back to meeting 101, good old-fashioned face-to-face, short and effective S&OP meeting cannot be substituted. And the other part is really important to collaborate with external parties. Visibility is key. If people are not aware of your plans, they cannot execute those plans for you. So that's a very important point to also factor into your strategy. Now, I hope this was informative. I'll be delighted to take some questions, either through this webinar or also outside. That's pretty much what we've got to cover today. So I hand over back to Manda. Manda, here you go.
Okay, thank you, Fred. And next we'll have Eric Linkswater. Eric will tie this back to some of the CBX software solutions that we have. Eric?
Okay, great. Thank you, Mander. And in particular, thank you, Fred, for your insights and the vital learnings surrounding speed to market challenges and the read and react model and how we can all employ those concepts as well as physical tools to help streamline and run our business. So appreciate that input. In short, CBX is an application delivered in the cloud. It serves to ensure that everyone, to Fred's point, has the right information to support their everyday decisions. These decisions meant to dramatically improve operational efficiencies, lower cost, and ultimately compress product development cycles, which directly addresses Fred's theme around speed to market. Amanda, if you just go to the next slide for me. I wanted to point out very specifically and re-emphasize Fred's concluding slide. I think the two companies, Weave Services and CBX, have several synergies. I was actually very excited to prepare our webinar today with Fred and his team because I believe our synergies and our thoughts and our learnings and our tools really overlap for what we provide our customers. I want to kind of lean on these principles and these concluding thoughts that Fred has as I draw some parallel and some complement to CBX and the application as it relates to the read and react model. We can go to the next slide, Mander. So Fred pointed out that in order to have a nimble supply chain, you must have effective interdepartmental decision making. I would say not only interdepartmental, but intra as well. So linearly across the decision-making chain as well as vertically. And unfortunately, most organizations today have a current way of thinking that actually impedes lead time reduction and prohibits the ability to develop a truly nimble supply chain. In fact, most studies that you look at say that up to 33% of an organization's activities are redundant lead-in and lead-out jobs or pointless time activities that don't lead to actual productive diminishment of the supply chain. This chart tries to illustrate that in the form of these gaps in between individual parties, individual activities, and so forth. So if you think about lead-in examples, the opening and merging and editing of spreadsheets and pulling reports from different disparate systems, and then trying to consolidate all that into one single report that can be actually digested by the next team in line, that's a lot of lost time. Fred alluded to that as well in his presentation a couple of times. Simultaneously, the lead-out activities contribute to these large gaps. These handoffs, taking this consolidated order data, order commitment data that Fred alluded to, and trying to consolidate that into a single report or to a single spreadsheet or to a single email stream that everyone can really understand and digest, is a tremendous amount of lost time. And this happens over and over and over again through a replenishment cycle or through a design cycle or through a sourcing and WIP cycle. And therefore, you just continuously experience an elongated supply chain. Now, to the contrary, Mander, if you go to the next chart, if you began to look into what tools are available, and in this particular case, I tried to illustrate the comprehensiveness of a tool like CBX, you can actually get collaborative workflow with no gaps, and most importantly, to Fred's point, you can also begin to introduce third-party participation in the decision cycle. So if you had a platform such as CBX that actually offers a continuum of flexibility and functionality from initial product ideation, so activities that are much further upstream than maybe even Fred began to allude to, but are equally important to begin an early communication cycle. And then you had the same handoff capability, but on a single platform through your specification process, into sourcing, through WIP, onto your final inspections, and then actually connecting it up with booking information and your shipping advice and actually seeing the product get into a container. If all of that was on a single platform, then all of the stakeholders would not have to be chasing each other for answers, but rather could log on and get the information at their disposal on demand when they wanted it. More importantly, this is all wrappered or could be wrappered with a critical path management workflow tool, so that folks that are starting to miss activities or activities coming into risk time modes could actually be automatically alerted to that happening. Finally, as you see across the bottom here, if you give access to the platform to your third-party partners, then you can be contributing in real time to the overall communication flow and eliminate email. To illustrate the point, I just have a few pictures that I'll conclude with. Mander, if you go to the next slide. If everyone had in the organization, including the third parties, a configurable role-based homepage to log on to from anywhere that they are working, anywhere in the world, they could land on a homepage that has all of the information consolidated in one simple, easy-to-navigate location. And from this, you could do certain things. So, for example, if Mander will go to the next slide, on the right-hand page, you could have a scrolling reel or a threaded messaging capability that allows you to keep up with all the separate conversations you're having. And these conversations can be quickly linked into the sub-conversations below the actual subject in question. So a nice social collaboration tool actually within the platform that you're using gets you to the next level. Mander, if you'll show me, I can now go right from the actual conversation in place to the actual live record, or in this case I'm illustrating that we have a particular project going on, and that conversation previously that I showed you relates to this project. So now I'm hyperlinking and I'm quickly navigating to the points of information where I can make real decisions. And on the right-hand side, you can see that the conversation going on is actually linked and is actually sitting right inside the master record. Finally, one point I wanted to make was about critical path management and about the workflow engine that is afforded to you if you implement a system such as this. Mander, if we can go to the next slide. Right from that home page, I'm accessing my critical paths, those things that are important to me. I've blown some of these pictures up in the next slide to make it a little bit easier to read. You can have a critical path, Mander. You can have a critical path developed for any set of activities in your daily workflow. And these critical paths can be accessible and visible to all intra, and external third parties. Here's a critical path just around item development, where everybody is staying on track and understanding the points of risk. If we go to the next slide, we'll see a different example. Here's a critical path very relevant to what Fred was boiling down in his presentation. If I could pull up and understand where I am with each purchase order in my actual WIP, I could start to identify where I may have bottlenecks that would negatively influence the current sales cycle as it relates to replenishment, as it relates to final inspection. I could have a better opportunity to make those decisions that Fred was employing what we needed to be able to make. For example, do I go direct to store? Do I have a little extra time in the chain that I can actually wait and go to my DC and cross-dock? But without the information along the way of, have I hit my material delivery dates? Have I hit my cut sew dates? Am I close to hitting my X factory date? If I can't get that information shown to me in real detail, and Amanda, if you'll just go one more slide, I made it a little bit easier to read here. If you can't get this in real detail and easy to read and dynamically delivered to you, but you're rather waiting for someone to send an email, hopefully if they remember to, well then you're going to suffer some of the setbacks that Fred alluded to. Finally, and I'll leave with this one, there's a critical path around shipments as well, Mander. It's one thing to understand that my product is ready to be consolidated or ready to leave the factory, but what about all the other things that could impact my replenishment schedule or some of the key areas that Fred alluded to? Have I actually done all my paperwork that's required? Have I submitted all my customs filing paperwork? Do I have my right compliance and tariff codes, etc., attached to the bill of lading as it should be so that I don't experience further delays when I actually get to port? These are all the things that can be managed and can create an actual compressed supply chain. Mander, if you'll just go to my concluding slide. All of these types of things and more that I would be happy to share with you in the coming weeks and months if you wanted to contact us. All of these things can contribute to a true nimble and agile supply chain that delivers real results. I won't read these numbers to you, but I think they can be pretty compelling if you try to absorb them. Most of the customers that implement the processes and the tools that we've introduced briefly here, both from Weave Services as well as from CBX, and realize some of these tremendous cost savings and some of these tremendous time-saving efficiencies within their operations. So that brings us to the end of our webinar today. We really appreciate you taking the time to share in our thoughts, understand a little bit more about the opportunities that you have ahead of you. Please do not hesitate to contact either Fred or myself at the email information that's there on the screen, or visit our websites, and we will be happy to answer those questions for you in due time. Thank you for attending.